Have you ever wondered how the giants mentioned in the Bible, like Goliath, could have survived the flood that supposedly wiped out all life on earth? This is one of the most intriguing and rarely discussed questions within biblical stories. What really happened to the Nephilim, the giants born from the union of fallen angels and human women? Moses, in his writings, may have revealed shocking clues that went unnoticed for centuries. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew. The answer isn't just in the waters of the flood, but in the genetic code that has been passed down through generations. Yes, the same genes that determine simple traits like eye color today may have carried the gigantism that defied divine order. And within the pages of Genesis, Deuteronomy, and even the accounts in the book of Enoch, we find hints of how these traits persisted, even in the face of such a radical purification. But beware. This isn't your typical tale of sin and punishment. It's a story that blends science, history, and spirituality to reveal truths many prefer to ignore. The curse of Canaan, Noah's lineage, and divine judgment are pieces of a larger puzzle that connects the distant past to the present in ways that may surprise you. Ready to dive into this mystery and uncover the secrets of the giants? Then read on, because the answers are right in front of you. But be careful. What you're about to learn may change the way you see the world and the divine plan itself. The Nephilim are an intriguing figure in the Bible, described as giants born from the union of fallen angels and human women. This celestial and earthly mixture created beings that, according to Genesis, prompted God to send the flood to cleanse the earth. But what if the Nephilim weren't completely eradicated? Texts like Numbers 13:33 seem to suggest otherwise. Imagine spies sent by Moses describing the giants in Canaan, comparing themselves to grasshoppers in their presence. Don't these words sound like echoes of something that should have been destroyed? Exploring the context, we see that Moses encountered more than simple accounts. Canaan, the promised land, was also home to giants known as the sons of Anak, possibly descendants of the Nephilim. It's fascinating how biblical texts open windows to such rich interpretations. The question arises, how could these giants exist after the flood was declared the end of all impure flesh? The answer may lie in genetic traits that defied extinction. Just as a wildfire can destroy a forest but leave seeds hidden in the soil, the lineage of the Nephilim may have survived in a latent form. The Bible doesn't give us all the pieces right away, but offers hints. Canaan and its inhabitants are constantly mentioned as carriers of peculiar characteristics, connecting them to the giants of the past. Consider the accounts of the ancient Hebrews. They faced a land that was anything but ordinary. Canaan was filled with challenges and legends of giants that fit perfectly into the narrative of the Nephilim. After all, how would a people who had just escaped slavery in Egypt react to discovering that their promised land was inhabited by such grand beings? Now, the line connecting Genesis and Numbers begins to make sense. The flood didn't erase the traits of the Nephilim but buried them deep within humanity's genetic structure, something like a genetic code waiting for the right conditions to manifest. And as we will see, those conditions may have involved some very human choices. Opening the door to the next topic, we can ask ourselves, could the descendants of Noah, so praised for their purity, have unknowingly carried the seed of these giants? This leads us directly to the question of Noah's lineage and its implications for the propagation of the traits of the Nephilim. Noah's story is widely known as the narrative of a righteous man chosen to save God's creation from the flood. However, when we take a closer look, we realize that the legacy of his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, is just as complex as it is fascinating. Genesis 9:18-19 mentions that all humanity descends from these three men, but what happened when Ham's lineage in particular entered the picture? And what exactly did the curse of Canaan mean for the future of giants on earth? Ham, it seems, was at the center of a dark incident involving his father, Noah. This event culminated in the curse of his son, Canaan, as described in Genesis 9:25. From that point on, the Bible frequently connects Canaan and his descendants with practices that were far from moral or spiritual purity. But here's the intriguing part. The wives of Noah's sons are rarely discussed, and the video suggests they might have carried genetic traits tracing back to the Nephilim. Could giants have literally been embedded in the veins of this new humanity? Consider the genetic impact a single generation can have. If one of Noah's sons' wives carried recessive genes for gigantism, those traits could have remained hidden for generations until the perfect combination allowed them to emerge. Imagine a field of buried seeds that only need fertile soil to bloom. That's exactly what may have happened with the descendants of Canaan. On the other hand, the curse of Canaan reinforces the idea that something deeper was at play. It wasn't merely a moral punishment, it was a declaration that set Canaan apart from his brothers, tying him to a unique destiny. Canaan and his descendants became synonymous with idolatry and immoral practices frequently associated with giants like Goliath. This raises a compelling question. Was the curse the catalyst for the re-emergence of giants in the Canaanite lineage? Noah may have been pure in God's eyes, but his lineage didn't always follow his example. Shem, Ham, and Japheth represent not only three branches of humanity, but also three distinct paths that biblical history takes. Ham's line, in particular, leaves a trail of mystery and consequences that shape the narrative of the giants. With these pieces on the board, it's clear that gigantism didn't entirely disappear after the flood. What seemed like a new beginning for humanity may, in fact, have been the continuation of a complex story. But what exactly allows characteristics like gigantism to reappear? This brings us to the question of genetics, which helps us understand how specific traits can travel through generations and manifest over time. When discussing gigantism in the Bible, modern science provides a fascinating lens through which to examine the phenomenon. Gigantism, as mentioned in the video, can be explained through recessive genes. Much like physical traits such as blue eyes, these genes require specific conditions to manifest. Think about it. A person might carry a recessive gene for generations without realizing it, until they meet someone who carries the same gene. This may have been the case with the Nephilim lineage, possibly passed down through the wives of Noah's sons. The genetic explanation is captivating. Recessive traits like gigantism can remain dormant for centuries. Consider the impact of common practices at the time, such as consanguineous marriages, which increased the likelihood of two carriers of the same gene coming together. Texts like Genesis 20:12 reveal that Sarah, Abraham's wife, was also his half-sister, a practice that, while shocking to us, was common and culturally acceptable in that era. Moreover, the reappearance of giants like Goliath, with his 6-cubit height, prompts reflection on how these genetic traits could have been amplified in specific lineages. Canaan, often cited as bearing the curse of Ham, may have been one of the main points of manifestation for these genes. Gigantism wasn't merely physical, it was also symbolic, highlighting a lineage set apart and often in opposition to divine plans. The Bible isn't just a spiritual book, it's also a historical record that suggests genetic connections in ways its authors likely never imagined. If a descendant of Noah's sons carried the gene for gigantism, it would explain why traits like these reappear at specific times and places. In this case, science meets theology, shedding light on questions that once seemed unfathomable. But don't think genetic traits operate in isolation. Cultural and environmental factors also play a crucial role. In those times, communities were isolated, and endogamy, marriages within the same tribe or family, was a common practice. This created the perfect environment for recessive traits to strengthen and become more apparent. These genetic and cultural traits shaped much of what we see in biblical stories. However, when we examine their impact on Canaan and how the Israelites confronted these giants, the question becomes even more complex. How did traits like gigantism influence the cultures and beliefs that emerged? Let's explore that next. The biblical backdrop involving the giants, or Nephilim, is filled with both direct and implicit instructions on how to deal with the lineage that survived the flood. Texts like Deuteronomy 7:1-3 are a clear example of this. God instructed the Israelites to completely destroy the nations of Canaan, including the giants, to prevent their idolatrous and immoral practices from contaminating his chosen people. Here it becomes clear that the issue wasn't just physical but spiritual as well, a confrontation between purity and corruption. The descendants of Canaan, mentioned in Genesis 10, include groups known as the Hittites, Amorites, and Jebusites, all identified as inheritors of practices contrary to divine precepts. But what makes them even more fascinating are the explicit references to giants among them, such as the sons of Anak. These individuals, described as enormous and powerful, symbolized a literal and figurative resistance to God's command to purify the earth and establish a holy nation. The Book of Enoch adds another layer to this narrative, detailing the eternal judgment of the fallen angels who fathered the Nephilim. These angels faced punishments so severe that they served as a warning to any celestial being contemplating a similar mistake. Yet the legacy of the giants persisted among humans, connecting cultural practices like idolatry directly to the lineage of Canaan. The Bible also highlights how these practices and beliefs manifested tangibly. For instance, idolatry wasn't merely a matter of belief. It was evident in customs, fortified cities, and even rituals the Israelites encountered when entering the Promised Land. This clash between the Israelites and the Canaanite giants shows that the battle was not only physical, but also spiritual and ideological. It's interesting to note how Canaan's lineage, directly tied to Ham's curse, symbolizes a perpetuation of practices God sought to eradicate. The Bible emphasizes this connection to demonstrate how the Nephilim, though considered extinct after the flood, still had a powerful echo in the cultural and spiritual fabric of ancient nations. Now that we understand how giants and their influence shaped the cultures of Canaan, the question remains, what was the lasting impact of Canaan's curse on these lineages and its consequences for God's people? Let's delve into this in the next topic. The curse of Canaan, described in Genesis 9:25, was not just a sentence of submission, but also a landmark in the biblical narrative about lineages and consequences. Canaan, Ham's son, became the symbol of a legacy that mixed idolatry, immoral practices, and the re-emergence of giants. This curse shaped future generations, creating a stark contrast to the purity sought by God for the descendants of Shem and Japheth. But what does this mean in practice? The answer lies both in the lineages and the historical events described in the Bible. Canaan was the promised land for the Israelites, but also the birthplace of giants like Goliath, whose gigantism can be seen as a literal manifestation of the curse. Genesis 6:4 mentions the Nephilim as those who existed in those days and also afterward, suggesting that genetic traits could have survived within the Canaanite lineage. In this sense, the curse was not only a moral burden, but also a key to understanding why certain characteristics re-emerged so strongly among Canaan's descendants. The Bible highlights the connection between Canaan and the practices condemned by God. Canaanite nations such as the Amorites and Jebusites were not merely physical enemies. They were spiritual adversaries, steeped in idolatry. Deuteronomy 7:1-3 emphasizes the necessity of destroying these nations, including their giants, to preserve the sanctity of Israel. The battle against the giants of Canaan was, therefore, a fight not only against genetic traits, but also against cultural and spiritual influences. Goliath, described in 1 Samuel 17:4, embodies this curse. With his height of 6 cubits and his intimidating presence, he represents an echo of the Nephilim's past, challenging the divine covenant with Israel. David's defeat of Goliath as a young shepherd symbolizes not only God's strength against powerful enemies, but also the overcoming of undesirable traits that persisted within humanity. The curse of Canaan thus serves as a bridge between the past and the future. It explains how genetic and cultural characteristics can withstand time and manifest in unexpected ways. More than that, it shows how human choices, both good and bad, shape the destiny of future generations. Reflecting on this lineage raises the question, how can recessive traits and curses coexist within such a meticulously designed divine plan? This sets the stage for understanding how the science of genetics and cultural practices intertwine with an ancient yet relevant narrative. Let's delve deeper into this connection. Genetic traits are fascinating because they act like an invisible book carrying the history of humanity. When we examine the narrative of the Nephilim and the giants of Canaan, we find an impressive example of how recessive genes can span generations and reappear at specific moments. It's almost as if the Bible, with its profound and symbolic texts, was giving us hints about science long before it was formally discovered. Recessive genes, like those responsible for gigantism, require specific conditions to emerge. Imagine a puzzle piece that only fits when the right genetic combination occurs. In the case of Noah's descendants, the suggestion that their wives may have carried these traits sheds light on the perpetuation of the Nephilim. If these recessive characteristics remained hidden for generations, endogamy, a common practice in antiquity, could have been the catalyst that brought giants back into prominence. Goliath's case is particularly intriguing. His gigantism wasn't merely a biological curiosity, it was a physical reminder of the Canaanite lineage and its connection to the Nephilim. Modern science explains how recessive genes can lie dormant for centuries before resurfacing. This understanding reinforces the idea that Canaan's lineage was destined to carry traits that set it apart from the other descendants of Noah. However, science doesn't operate in isolation. Cultural and spiritual factors also influenced how these characteristics were perceived and treated. At that time, physical traits were often associated with divine blessings or curses. Goliath's immense height was seen as a sign of his connection to something beyond human, a challenge to divine order. This perception shaped how the Israelites confronted the giants, both in battle and in their spiritual narrative. And speaking of that, the Bible doesn't just document these events, it connects them to a greater plan. The genetic traits of the Nephilim serve as a reminder of how the past is never entirely separate from the present. Even after the flood, humanity carried not only the promise of a new beginning, but also the remnants of an ancient, corrupted world. The connection between science and spirituality, then, is not something to overlook. It's a way of understanding how biblical stories engage with the reality we see today. And as we conclude this journey, the question remains, what can we learn about ourselves by examining these narratives that bridge the human and the divine? Now that you've taken this journey to uncover the secrets of the giants, the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Knowing that traits like gigantism, ancient lineages, and curses can span generations invites us to reflect on our own heritage. What's hidden in your story that you've yet to discover? How might the choices of your ancestors be shaping who you are today? The Bible shows us that even in the face of giant challenges, literally like Goliath, courage and wisdom can prevail. If David's story teaches us anything, it's that no one is too small to defeat their own giants. What's standing in your way today that feels insurmountable? Perhaps by confronting it, you'll discover you have the strength to overcome it, just as David did. But don't stay stuck in theory. Put what you've learned here into practice. Investigate your origins, understand the legacies that have shaped your life, and face your challenges with the confidence that the past doesn't define your future. After all, it's not just the story of the Nephilim that has endured. It's our ability to learn, grow, and rewrite our destiny. Want to keep learning more about fascinating topics like this? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next videos. Share this knowledge with others who are also seeking to understand the hidden mysteries of the scriptures and the universe. And remember, knowledge is the greatest giant you can conquer.